COVID, so we didn't. But I'm glad we're doing it now, 2 years later, because we have a lot more to tell you. All right, so this session will provide a glimpse of what we've been up to at MnDOT, the State Preservation Office, and also the State Archaeologist, and the Minnesota Geospatial Information Office over the past 8 years or so. So some of what we're going to talk about today may be familiar to you, but much of it probably is not. So I'm going to use the term streamlining project a lot in this presentation. But what I'm referring to by that are projects that we undertake as agencies that make the other work we do easier to do. So the session purpose is we're going to talk about one of our existing streamlining applications. We're going to go over a couple of current streamlining projects that are ongoing right now. Then we're going to talk about how some of those efforts are feeding into a bigger effort that is all going to be available to you guys in a year or so. And then I'm also going to talk a little bit, or we're going to talk about what folks can expect over the next few years with digital access to the historic resource records. So this is a really exciting time for historic preservationists in Minnesota, and we're here to tell you what happens. So the central problem that we're trying to solve with these digital streamlining efforts are to provide access to historic resource records and processes online. But the tricky part is you have to ensure that the information that you're showing folks is that you're showing the right folks the right information. Some of the information is protected. Almost all archaeological site information. Some of the other records are protected, so they're not supposed to be seen by everybody. But many of the records are not necessarily protected or restricted. We like to be able to show folks as much of those as So I'm going to be referring to archaeological sites and the building historic resources during that talk. This is kind of a shorthand that I'm using. At a really high level, there's about 90,000 inventory buildings and structures in the state, and there's about 20,000 archaeological sites. So there's a lot of information about a lot of sites throughout the state. Now these resources are documented for lots of different reasons. The primary one is with compliance for historic preservation laws, Section 1 Preservation Act. But there's other projects like legacy grants or other reconnaissance level efforts for documenting historic resources like in a certain city, things like that. The documentation that's included for these properties generally includes the physical description, the setting. There's usually a map of where the resource is located. There might be photographs, there might be other historic research that talks about the archaeological site or the standing building structure, or other information to help contextualize the resource. Until recently, you had to go to St. Paul to the State Preservation Office or the Office of the State Archaeologist to pull these records into use. They're all physical files. With the launch of the OSA portal, the Office of the State Archaeologist portal, which Bruce will talk about here today, in 2017, people had archaeologists had access to those resources easily through online applications. SHPO, over the past few years, COVID has developed some means for accessing some of their records digitally, but not in a self-serve manner where folks can just go in and access themselves. So that's one of the things that we're working on. But, speaking of COVID, that exposed some critical weaknesses that we already had with the paper system record in place. The primary one is, what about folks in greater Minnesota? It's difficult to get down to St. Paul. These were believed to kind of a good way to pass late. So it was, almost 4-hour drive to St. Paul. So it was tricky to do the historical research that I needed to do when I worked up there. So if we do it from pass late, it saved me a trip. That's the thing I work on. Also, too, working with physical record can also be time consuming and cumbersome. So if we can do it in a digital way, it's much easier for us. So addressing the central problem. So building applications to move existing databases, paper records, and processes to an online application is hard work and requires thoroughness and thoughtfulness. In order to create an app that includes all existing records, you need to be able to, and also allow you to update existing records and bring in new records. There's a few foundational things you have to do first. The first and probably the most important is you need to make sure that the underlying database that contains all the current records is not only complete, but it's also functions properly. Really, the backbone of an application is really an application is just a fancy way to add, edit, and manage data within a database. When you're doing it in a user-friendly interface, that's the application. Also, to be able to provide access to the paper records, you need to scan all those legacy records, which is something we'll talk about a little bit later on. So you need to have high-resolution scans of those physical files. Additionally, if you want to be able to show where the property is located, you need to have a geographic information system, digital location information for all those properties. And then finally, this is a really tricky part, is you need to understand the as-is and will-be business process for viewing, adding, editing, and managing those records. So you really need to lock down the business process to make sure that you understand the steps that need to be done to have access to these records and make sure that everything is updated. Because applications, unlike in the paper rule or records, there's rules and you have to follow the rules to be able to make sure that everything is going to update as needed. So once you get those foundational pieces in place, then you're ready to build an application to provide access to your records. So you're probably asking yourself, like, great, this seems like the State Preservation Office, perhaps the State Archaeologist issue. Why is the archaeologists and MnDOT talking about this? Which is a really hard question. So MnDOT, as an agency, we need to have access to easy access to complete and accurate records of known archaeological sites and known inventory buildings and structures. As an agency, we review almost 500 projects that are federally received in a year. And what we do is that we need to know what has already been reported out there within our project area to assess the impacts of that project on those resources. Oh, I'm sorry, you guys having trouble hearing me? Oh, the fan. Okay, that's right. Yeah, so we need to know where those previously recorded records are, so that our sites are in buildings, so we can understand the impact of our project on those properties. So, and then as an agency, we can do our work quicker, faster, better, and with better outcomes if we have access to updated records. Additionally, if we build these applications that can help us out, we can also help a lot of other people at the same time. So if we build these applications, it works out for the State Archaeologist Office, the State Preservation Office, tribes, federal agencies, the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council, and the general public. So all those stakeholders are absolutely considered as central stakeholders for the work that we're doing with these applications. So that's a bit about why MnDOT is involved and how MnDOT is involved. What I'll cover on this slide. So the Federal Highway Administration and MnDOT have a huge stake in making sure that that we're able to complete our transportation projects efficiently and using the best information possible. So over the past 25 years, they've dedicated money to help streamline our work. And over the past 8 or so years, we've focused a lot of that streamlining funds towards building applications that we're going to be talking about today. So the cost of these projects is substantial. So we've spent about $4.5 million total, our partners and MnDOT, on these projects that we'll be talking about. We typically try to get an 80-20 cost share. That doesn't always happen. That's something we strive for. And then additionally, since these are, you can get a sense from the amount of money that's involved in these are large, complex projects, we've been able to have staff from the various agencies that we partner with, and also at the DOT to help run these projects. So today you're going to hear about 2 applications, and Bruce and Jim are going to go much deeper into this, but I'll just introduce them right now, just to help sort of set some of the late framework for that. So the first application that we went through earlier is also of the State Archaeologist world. And this is an online application for viewing, adding, editing, and managing information on archaeological sites and site forms. This was built by MnGeo, which is the Minnesota Geospatial Information Office, I believe. The acronym, it's not even an acronym, it's what they're called. But they're basically the branch of the Minnesota Information Technology that specializes on geospatially centered apps. So their whole deal is making applications that are centered on where are things located and what are those things. So this application, we'll talk more about this, it has a major update plan for 2025. The other application we'll be talking about today, and along with the ones that are going to feed into those, is the MnDOT application. And this is very similar to the OSA portal, except for that it's focused on those standing buildings and structures and being able to view, edit, and manage those records. And that application is currently being built for NetMeet right now, but we're going to launch that in about a year. So we're very excited about that. So just a little glimpse of the near future. My hope is that through these talks today, we get a sense of where we're at right now, where we're going to be really soon, and then where we're going to be a little bit further down the road. So by 2023, we're going to have 2 applications that will provide digital access to historic resource records. The OSA portal for archaeological sites, and the MnDOT application for standing buildings and structures. So these applications are going to be separate standalone applications. They're not necessarily going to talk to each other or be integrated, which is fine because they're dealing with 2 separate resource types that have their own user bases, databases, resources. They're interrelated, but they're separate. They're going to be 2 separate applications. But they're going to be really similar. They're both going to have an interactive map to be able to look across anywhere in the state and see where the previously reported properties are. They're going to have databases that will allow you to make your own custom queries and look at, it'll basically provide a glimpse of the existing databases within these applications. We're also going to provide access to the legacy documents, the paper records that pre-exist in the applications, and then also data that has been added to those applications since they've been launched. And then one of the really exciting features is we're going to have free text search, which will allow people to do a custom search based on a keyword across all the records in the application. I think it's going to have huge potential for research. So the middle future, so we're talking after 2025, don't pin me down on any of the dates, but this is something that we're looking for in the middle distance. It's early days, but there's some other ways that we can add to these applications. And we're laying the groundwork right now to get the information to do that. So we're currently having an effort where we're scanning all the architecture history reports and the accompanying GIS data that is related to those, so the survey areas that the architecture history reports cover. So an architecture history report will have a lot of information that maybe a specific form for resource won't have. It might have architectural information. It's usually more project specific, but a lot of information in it that'll be very useful. We're also hoping to, in the very near future, just do the same thing for the archaeological reports, so scan the archaeological reports and get the GIS data for the survey areas for the archaeological studies that the reports are that are related to those reports. We're hoping to have that done in a couple of years. So we're still trying to work out how we're going to serve up that information, whether they go in an application or whether they don't. But we're getting that groundwork set up right now, so we can do that if we'd like to. Then beyond that, there's still many aspects of the way we do our work in Minnesota that we can improve, and we're hoping to do that over the long term. And I'm really excited to see what direction we take this, because I think we're making some great leaps over the next few years. So in this session, I gave the introduction, and then Bruce Koenen from the Boston State Archaeologist will discuss the OSA portal next, followed by Maggie who will discuss the getting the GIS data of the standing buildings and structures, and then Stephanie Atwood Hatzenbuhler will do discuss the scanning of the SHPO's historic inventory and National Register files. And then Jim Krumrie will talk about how we're going to take those different pieces of the GIS data and the scans and bring those into an application. And then hopefully at the end we'll have some time for questions. So we'll take questions at the very end. So please, if we have questions, write it down. We'll have it. So thank you for attending, and I'll hand you over to Bruce.
Thank you. Can you hear me? My name is Koenen. I've been at the Archaeologist's Office for almost 30 years now. I'm kind of an institutional memory, and I've worked for 3 different state archaeologists. And I was here when we started talking about building something like this. I remember starting talking about something like this. The MnDOT people came to us in the late 90s. So it's taken us decades to get here. I mean, these guys are saying we started talking in early 2000s, but it's been a little longer than that. And part of the problem is it's just funding something like this. It takes a lot of money. It takes time to build this. And there's all sorts of things you have to consider that you don't realize when you start out. How is this going to work? How is it going to be updated? And one of the issues that we kept running into regularly was that the people who were building this, the IT staff and the archaeologists, talked 2 separate languages. It took us months to figure out what the other one was talking about. And that's why I'm a little more comfortable about what's happening now and what's being built at SHPO. It's because we're working with the same kind of group of people who are familiar with the terms we use and how we do things. So I'm hoping we're going to have a little bit more success in the future in what we're building right now. But one of the traditional roles of the Office of the State Archaeologist is assigning archaeological site numbers and maintaining the state's archaeological site files. The state's site file is a collection of recorded archaeological sites within the state of Minnesota, started in the early 1950s by Alvin Johnson at the University of Minnesota as a research tool for archaeologists. Currently, we have 20,888 recorded sites. I think right now I have 30 new site forms sitting in my inbox that I have to deal with. The locations of these archaeological sites affect public development projects, since by law the cultural resources need to be considered when public development takes place. The vast majority of the recorded archaeological sites are pre-contact in age, since traditionally most archaeologists working here focused on the distant past. That has changed in the last couple of decades, and now historic archaeological sites with intact deposits more than 50 years old are also recorded. These files were, like most records, kept as paper copies only, accessible by visiting the Office of the State Archaeologist. MnDOT championed the idea of an effort to facilitate the creation of a website to make information more readily available to researchers, and we greatly appreciate their contribution financially and logistically. Building the website was a multi-year process with initial stakeholder discussions beginning about the year 2000. Many of the same issues that we are discussing that are being discussed by my fellow presenters were addressed in the development of the OSA portal, including things like the accuracy of the data presented. Most of the recorded archaeological sites were documented before the widespread use of global positioning systems, and some before topographic maps were invented. There are sites that were documented in the 1880s that have not been revisited, so the user needs to be aware that the accuracy of the site boundary and location presented in the portal may need confirmation. A somewhat false sense of security is created since newly created sites in the portal can be plotted with sub-meter accuracy, while all of the pre-existing or legacy sites were simply imported without any review. A beta version of the site was first went active in 2017. The current version, shown here, was last updated in June of this year. It provides access to not only archaeological site inventory, but also the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council's listing of archaeological and cultural sites for all of Minnesota and layers of the Minnesota statewide archaeological predictive model, a MnDOT project that developed to predict the potential presence or potential absence of sites in unsurveyed areas across the state. In accordance with Section 304 of the National Historic Preservation Act, Minnesota Statute 30708, Subdivision 11, and Minnesota Statute 13.37, full access to detailed records is reserved for qualified archaeologists and historic preservation professionals, tribal historic preservation officers, and the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council. Since in Minnesota, archaeological site location information is considered protected data, like your medical or financial records, the major concern in building the portal is how to securely present the information. The solution was the creation of different levels of access to the information and the managing of access to those items. This was a accomplished by creating GIS maps with different levels of resolution about site location. Credentials need to be submitted and approved before a higher level of access is granted. There's a public version, which looks like this, which simply indicates the number of recorded sites in the section. The hashed areas are locations of concern provided by the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council. Everyone has access to this map. No information is provided about the type of site or location in the section. The sites don't always fit, sites don't always fit nicely in one section, and can be presented more than one section. Adjacent sections with a single site list might just be a single site straddling section. And here you can see the hash lines. The lower left block of things is something that came from the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council. The sort of solid colored squares are those that the information came from the State Archaeologist. And again, it just lists the number of sites that are reported in that section. The public land manager level access. So like this. Provides more resolution. It shows the presence or absence of sites within 40-acre parcels, so small portions of a given section. As with the public view, it includes the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council layer and the Minnesota layer, but also identifies 40-acre parcels that contain mortuary sites. Mortuary sites merit some special consideration. And by clicking on one of the polygons, the 40-acre parcels, you can get a detailed pop-up, which provides the archaeological site number, so you can contact our office and figure out what kind of site you have and where it is. Again, smaller parcels, those solid shaded ones are the ones that are OSA-related archaeological sites. And those that are captured from northwest to southeast are the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council. Those that are burials are captured from northeast and southwest. And so there's sites that are sort of flat looking there that are captured both ways, that are things that are reported by most of us in the State Archaeologists, the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council, and are reported as cemetery burial sites. The professional level of access is like this. It presents the actual site polygon shown on the GIS map and access to downloadable site forms. By selecting a site polygon and clicking on it, a pop-up appears providing site details. This happens to be the Hill House in St. Paul. The site boundary is shown there, and you click on it, and you get a pop-up that gives you the details on it. You can scroll down that, and it gives you a listing of site details. And then the pop-up, if you click on the lower left corner there, it says site details. You'll get another page that looks like this, which basically presents the same different information map. And if you scroll down to this, you can see some information. You can actually see the scan site form and things like that. Full access report also provides a number of different layers, allowing the researcher to do additional research about the project area. It includes a variety of base map options such as aerial imagery, street maps, a combination of street maps and imagery, and various topographic maps. Then a variety of options can be layered on top of the base map, including archaeological sites, Minnesota Indian Affairs Council layer, boundary and public land survey systems, or county boundaries, township boundaries, section lines, transportation projects, so there's a layer that shows upcoming MnDOT projects, topography, water, natural resources. You can add 10-foot contour lines, unrecorded historic cemeteries, and a series of layers for the MnDOT model that shows some predictive information about where sites could potentially be located. There are links to historic aerial photographs, layers showing archaeological regions. The Minnesota original land survey information gives the sort of the Duluth area with the archaeological sites laid on it, the original land survey information, and then the red polygons there on the sort of right side are a breakwater, a dock, and a gravel rim. Also available is the LiDAR information. I don't know if most of you are available with LiDAR. LiDAR is a fantastic tool. It lets you see land surfaces through trees and everything else. For us, it's very useful, for example, looking for burial mounds. On the other hand, we do have issues once in a while with things that, because you don't know what something is for sure, and you see bumps that are the size and shape of a burial mound, and they turn out to be straw piles or brush piles, or we had some that were piles of bricks, or just simply landscaping, modern landscaping creative features. But it allows researchers, when you're doing, looking at a project, you're wondering about what's there, what we're going to run into in the field, and all these different layers that we've got available in the portal allow researchers to do some additional searching about the site they're working on. The GIS map is sort of the sexy side of the portal. The other component is a database of site information, which looks like this. Here users are able to search for sites by state site number, site name, county, review and compliance number, township range section. A search compiles a list of sites, and the user is then able to review the site details or update an existing site record. Professional users also have the ability to add new sites to the portal, which go through a review process by me before being permanently added to the site. The site is not static. The GIS map is updated nightly, and the approved archaeological sites added to the database are available to access as soon as I approve them. Maintenance of the site is ongoing. For example, since it is web-based, changes made to web browsers by the developers can affect portal performance and need to be accommodated in the portal programming. Staff needs to respond to user questions and concerns and administer access to the portal. Like all computer programs, it does have occasional glitches, and someone needs to address these problems for the users. Around 300 new sites are added or updated a year. However, it is good to keep in mind that the portal does not include all of the recorded archaeological sites in the state. The tribal historic preservation offices and federal agencies like the National Forest Service also maintain lists of archaeological sites which may or may not be included in the portal. We had some discussions right before COVID hit with the National Forest about potentially adding their sites to this list. We do have some of those, but they were last updated kind of right when we turned the portal on, so it's been several years. But COVID hit and our proposed meetings got canceled, and it's still just kind of sitting on hold. There has recently been a rewrite of the program to comply to security standards, which was implemented this past June. Work has just started on a year-long review on how to make the portal better, with a plan to have an upgraded version available in 2025. Users who have access to the public level pay a yearly fee for access to cover the cost of housing and maintaining the site. And just sort of in conclusion, bridging the gap from paper to digital access is not as easy as simply scanning the existing legacy documents. There's a lot of stuff you have to consider and keep in mind, and it's kind of an ongoing thing on something like this where you want to current it updated. Thanks to MnDOT for providing the funding and resources to help us build the portal, and for Jake for organizing this session. Thank you. And now we turn it over to Jake. You can come up here and set this up.
I'm Maggie Jones. I'm a historian and a unit supervisor with MnDOT's Cultural Resources Unit. I was the MnDOT project manager for the collection and confirmation of GIS data for architectural history properties. We began this effort in 2019 and have been developing it and are continuing to develop it since that time. We recognized a need for accurate spatial data of historic properties and properties that have been inventoried. We need to know where they are and want to feel confident in where they are. As Jake mentioned, MnDOT has been very supportive of our unit's wish to develop better information and assisting our partners at SHPO. So, GIS is Geographic Information Systems. It includes points, lines, polygons on a map. Here's an example of what that kind of looks like. And then there's data attached to those points, lines, and polygons. So MnDOT recognized the need to know where historic properties are located. We have 600 reviews a year. We need to know what's in our project area, and we need to be able to find that information. And so we started developing this program off of that need. There's hundreds of projects we're reviewing, and making sure those locations are correct not only benefits us, we can then provide that information to the public, including CLGs and the SHPO or the correct tribal historic preservation officer based on where our project is and where those properties are that are in their area of interest. All right. One of the things we're able to do with this is by having those correct locations, we can potentially create more comparable searches and finding new ways to learn about architectural history properties. So if we have correct locations, for example, we could find all the William Gray Purcell banks in a certain city size, potentially, in Minnesota. We could find all the prairie-style banks in a specific city. All of that information is really helpful, and we can learn more about the history of Minnesota through that. On this map, I know it's kind of small for people in the back, but we have a sort of wavy line going through that's pink and black. That would be, for example, a project area around a road. You can see, or hopefully you can see, there's some red dots. Some of those are in the project area, some of them are not. By having this information and knowing exactly where those points are, we can say, oh, we know we have 3 properties that have already been inventoried in our project area, but we need to look at this many more. So prior to the start of this project, prior to 2020, we had very limited data that was GIS data. We had, SHPO had shared with us their access database, and in that access database there's, you can kind of see here, there's information on the inventory number and address, and there is UTM information, which is like latitude, longitude sort of thing, so we can use that, but it has to be accurate. And so we had some information, and they were very kind to share that with us, but it's general and it could be varying accuracy. Some of this information was created in the 1980s, and it is great information, but it doesn't have the exact address of the historic building, or some examples here are the address for some properties were Minnesota Avenue North between 2nd and 3rd Street. Now, it's good, it provides us a point, sort of, or a block, but we don't know exactly which property it is on that without looking at the inventory form in more detail. Or it says 1XX 5th Street Northeast. Now it's helpful, but it doesn't give us an exact location. So it's somewhat incomplete data that requires a lot of additional research, time, and money to find that information. And SHPO had over 85,000 inventory forms. They have over 90,000 now, so it just keeps growing, and it's only been 3 years, and there's already 5,000 more inventory forms. And one of the ways that information went into the system was typing it in from paper to the computer, and so there's also just room for human error, which hopefully there's not that much human error in there, but it is something to consider. So one of our project goals for this was to create GIS points, lines, and polygons for all inventory properties in Minnesota, and locations that people can feel confident in and know that they're finding the right information. So we recognized that we needed to find a way to double check the properties, maybe even triple check them in some instances. Let's see. And often when people see a map with a point, they assume that point is correct. I do that too, but we need to be able to know that it's correct, and the points should always be double checked. But we'd like MnDOT, SHPO, CLGs, other agencies, and the general public to feel confident in this data. So that was our main goal for this project. All right, our methodology. In 2019, we took the the access database table, the Excel spreadsheet essentially, with the 85,000 inventory form records in that data. We just took all that information and we found a way to prioritize the information. So we were first going to focus on properties that had UTM information, so latitude, longitude information, and complete addresses, because those were going to be the easiest to get and feel confident in that data. And then after that, we created a copy of the addresses and in another line and changed them to be all the same format. So instead of North 1st Street Southwest, we changed it all to building number 1st Street Northwest. With that data, then we ran it through a GIS geocoder program, and they were able, through that GIS magic, they were able to find points of exactly where those addresses should be. Now, there may be multiple 301 1st Street Northeast in maybe they have different city names, and sometimes those are not quite accurate. So addresses are great, but we weren't always able to feel 100% confident in that location, because there could be different towns that have the same address format and things like that. Great. So from our initial data pool for generating locations, we had 61% of them were from the addresses alone. And then 18% were from the UTM data, and 17% was from MnDOT projects specifically. We've had our consultants provide us GIS information for over 10 years now. And then 4% we were not able to find any location. Maybe those are non-extant properties, maybe they're just the address information wasn't usable. So with that information, we needed to double check the data. Like I said, the addresses, they could be in different cities. When they're supposed to be in Winona, they're in Henderson. So what we did is we created a system to double check. So we prioritized, hopefully it has an UTM, and then hopefully it has an address. And based on the information in the database, we were double checking that it was in this correct township range and section, the correct city based on the inventory number having the city code in the name itself. And so we created confidence scores based on that information. And hopefully our goal is to have everything be double checked, but hopefully everything triple checked. For properties with low confidence scores, we're trying to figure out ways over the years to feel more confident in those locations, and so that involved additional research. It meant historians were looking at inventory forms to find points on the maps in the inventory form. You might be asking why we didn't do that for all of the properties, and that's because it would have taken 14 years to go through every single one of the inventory forms and create and feel confident in the points. And that's if we had 2 people working on it at all times. And then, so for scores that we had those geocode scores. When the addresses were run through the Esri geocode program, it pops up a score of 99, 100% confident, 50% confident. Anything less than 98% confident, which is about 1,200 properties, we wanted to double check and make sure that the address was correct and the municipality was correct. In many situations, this involved having historians go through and correcting the addresses within the database itself to reflect where the property actually is based on the form or based on the GIS data we created. An additional quality check that we did in this most recent year is using a different program, using Google to geocode and double check 50,000 of the properties. So I don't know if you can see, but the first year of data is the purple dots on the road. Through the Google Geocode program, we were able to put the dots on the rooftops of the building instead. And so then we can feel more confident that if you're trying to figure out what property is this for. If it's on the rooftop, you feel a lot better about that than if it's on the road. There are still gaps. We've found locations for about 90,000 of the properties, because I think that there's closer to 93,000 now. But there are gaps. We're still working on scanning and still working on creating locations for the National Register of Districts and any data that has been added since the start of the project. We're just keep running into more and more data to create year after year, and so we have to create locations for that data. The example here is, if you can see the blue line, that's the original boundary for this National Register District. In 2018, the boundary was expanded to the red line. Now that data is not in our database yet because it's fairly new. So we'll be working on having historians go through and check all of the National Register eligible listed properties, district specifically, so we can all feel really good about those locations, since those are ones that we run into quite a bit. Some of the next steps are creating data for National Register listed and eligible properties. There are state site network and state register districts, and we need to create boundaries for those so that we can make sure, because sometimes they have different boundaries than the National Register ones, and then also just historic districts in general. And then this will all feed into what Jim is going to be talking about here shortly. This is going to all be available to the public within a year, hopefully. A year, yeah. All right, thank you.
Hatzenbuhler. I'm also a historian in MnDOT's Cultural Resources Unit, and I'm going to talk about digitizing SHPO's inventory forms and National Register forms. I think most people here are pretty familiar with National Register forms, and if you're not familiar with inventory forms, they're phase 1 and phase 2 forms created as part of the Section 106 process. Essentially, if a project has federal aid in it, federal money in it, you have to survey properties that are within a project area. I'm most familiar with above-ground architecture history properties, so we look at the survey, we go out and look at the properties that are there. Phase 1 is essentially just sort of documenting what's out there, and then phase 2 forms are analyzing at a deeper level, seeing if it's eligible for the National Register. Archaeological properties are a little different, but yeah, ask archaeologists about that. So SHPO's responsible for being the state depository for all these forms. They're public information, so they have to make those accessible to the public. And these forms have been available for decades. You can find some as old as the early 70s. So they've got thousands of forms. And currently, they've got tons of them, 38 stacks. If you go in their office, you'll find them, 190 drawers. So why do we need to digitize them? It's a huge effort to get to them if you're coming from out of state. If you want just a couple forms, you usually can email it, but if you need them for a big project, it's a lot of effort to go and get them, and you have to make copies of them. And this is an issue, as Jim mentioned, that has been recognized for years. The SHPO is managing tens of thousands of these. And for MnDOT CRU, as again, as was mentioned before, we're the biggest producer of them, and we request a lot of them. So it was hard to deal with these hard copies, and it became a strain for us to deal with these. But in 2018, it became more feasible for digitization to become possible because now both agencies were under the umbrella of the state system because SHPO moved from the Historical Society to the Department of Administration. And now we orchestrate efforts and funding became easier to deal with. So there are a couple of issues we had to address if we were looking at digitization of these files, because it's more than just inventory forms and national register forms if you're looking in the files that contain this information. For example, in inventory forms, you're going to find more than just inventory forms which cover 5 decades. And if you look at the forms themselves, they take all sorts of shapes. You have the older ones that are handwritten and the newer ones that are created by computers. You're going to find research about all the different forms, the different properties within them, and then a lot of the properties have different studies about them. In the National Register files, you're going to find the National Register forms themselves, and then draft forms for early versions. You're going to find correspondence about the properties themselves, early correspondence asking about potential nominations, research about the forms, about the properties themselves, and the USGS maps that were submitted as part of the nomination. And so digitizing these forms, these files would need to include organizational contents because people have gone in there, they've looked through all this information, they've sorted through it, stuff has just been put in there. So just years and years of people going through, shuffling through it, stuff being put in. And then there's just been a lot of address inconsistencies compared with the SHPO database. SHPO had been running this database trying to organize the information that had been coming in, and things have changed. So MnDOT, SOU, and SHPO began working on digitization of these properties. And that began in 2018. CRU and SHPO were talking together, figuring out how this project would get started. And MnDOT, CRU sent out a letter of interest, sort of an advertisement to the public, trying to find a project consultant that could take on this project. So it's way too big for CRU or SHPO to take on by themselves. And in 2019, Beaton Hunt was chosen to be the consultant, and they took on Section 106 as a sub-consultant. So Beaton Hunt would run the project with 106's help. Beaton Hunt would take care of the architectural history, properties, and 106 group were specialists in archaeology, so they would take care of the archaeology forms. And so this is basically everyone that worked on the project. We had help from SHPO, Western CRU, Beaton Hunt, and then 106 group, and basically everyone in the bottom row, they did, for lack of better terms, the grunt work, the organizing, the scanning, tracking all the properties. So we're looking at around 34 people that worked on this to date. So 2019, once we had everyone on board that we was going to work, the 2 agencies and the 2 companies got together and started saying, okay, how do we do this? Where do we start? So you start talking about issues that we knew that would come up. SHPO explained what was in their files, the issues they knew about, and what we all wanted to accomplish. And once we knew what we were doing, early 2020 we began test scanning with some counties, some smaller counties, and said, okay, here's what we're encountering. What are these problems? What are we finding in the files? And one thing we knew we were going to do is that we were going to stick with certain nomenclature. And this is how SHPO has been naming their inventory properties for however many years, using a county code, the city and township code, and a property number. So if you're inventoried a property in Hampton County, Minneapolis, you would call it that, and then every property gets a certain number. And we're using 5 numbers because a giant county like Minneapolis is already up to 10,000 inventory properties, even though a smaller county like Lockheed Carl might only have hundreds. Call Lockheed Carl 00100 because they all have a certain number, the same number of digits in their file name. And then the National Register form, we were not going to use National Register reference number. We were going to associate the National Register form with the inventory number by pinning it with the National Register letter. And then archaeological forms, we were going to stick with the same name that they've been using for archaeological forms, so we're not going to change that. And so the protocol I came up with is that all digitization will be done in the SHPO office, which is located in the admin building, so either in their space or dedicated spaces in the administration building, so that the forms would stay local, stay in the building, not get lost. And we would start with the inventory form files because they were most in demand and most what was needed, and they just had the largest number. And we would organize the form within the files, reverse chronologically, so the oldest stuff would be in the back, the newest stuff more recent, so that most relevant things would be in the beginning. If there were any reports, we would not scan the full report, just title page, so that the person looking at the file would know that the report was there, and if they wanted it, they could ask for it. And then, as the people working on the project were going through the files, they would track any missing forms that were shown in the database but not showing up in the actual cabinet. Forms that were in the cabinet but not shown up in the database. Properties that had inventory numbers, inventory number gaps, and then any issues they saw that needed to be discussed with SHPO. And then a lot of the older forms had photo strips or large format photos, negatives, and then scan them as possible, not negatives, but just scan them as part of the file so that the user can see that they exist. And then the metro counties were just left to the end because they were so massive. And then things were going well for a couple of months, and then COVID hit. So the result was that everything in the Capitol complex in St. Paul was shut down, which included MnDOT, central office, and SHPO's office. Those by order of Governor Walz. So that meant that we couldn't get into our office, SHPO couldn't get into their office, and the consultants could not access the SHPO files for 2 months. So that meant work was stalled out, so all of us had a emergency project meeting on May 4th, and we said, what we're going to do, we're in trouble. So we had to figure out how to move forward. We couldn't work anymore, we couldn't access, or the consultants couldn't access the files, but we had to keep working because if we weren't using project money, it looked like we didn't need the project money, and that could cut off our project funding. So we had to come up with a new scanning protocol. Our way of scanning the documents would stay the same, but we had to make some changes. So we couldn't work at the SHPO office or the admin building because they were remaining closed. So came up with something fairly unprecedented in that the files would be moved from the SHPO office in segments. And they'd be brought to Row 6's office and to Mead Hunts's office for offsite organization and scanning. And that required a lot of trust between SHPO and the companies because a lot of these forms were one of a kind. We had forms from like the early 80s, there were no duplicates, they couldn't be recreated, so they had to be really well tracked. And then returned to SHPO when the digitization was complete, and then the new section would be taken out. And so what the consultants did was really strictly track where everything was located, which forms were where, what their status was, and what they were doing. And they came up with, this is kind of small font, but they tracked where everything was located, how many forms were in each county, where the county was located, what its status was, and where it was going. So was it complete? Was it at SHPO? Was it at Mead Hunt? And then all the metros were still waiting to the very end. And then also we agreed that the consultants, because they were doing the scanning, they would help SHPO staff with the file backlog they had for scanning. And then when people wrote in and said, can you scan in such and such, even if consultants were not involved in that county or in a certain part of the project, they would assist SHPO by scanning in whatever people requested and send that to the user. So this is where we ended up. 84,000 forms scanned, Right now, they're still scanning the National Register forms. They have about 889 scanned, 20,000 archaeological forms scanned, over 19,000 consultant labor hours, 2.4 million for the project budget, 34 employees involved, and 2 million pages scanned. So our next steps is to complete scanning any remaining inventory forms, and then to complete scanning the National Register forms, and now we're working on scanning architecture history reports, which are also part of the Section 106 process, and to create GIS data for any existing forms that we have. And the plan is to complete all this work by June 30th, 2023. Thank you very much.
Everybody hear me okay? Okay, good. I'm Jim Krumrie, the data manager at SHPO, in case you don't know who I am. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about the application that is being developed with MnDOT's help, and also being developed by a MnGeo called MnShip, which is our Minnesota State Historic Inventory Corps. Basically, it's going to be a website that's going to have our inventory information. In a sense, as Stephanie mentioned, it's going to, we're finishing up scanning next summer, and we're also would like to have the first version, at least, of MnShip available next summer. And what it does is it combines these three basic parts. It's our inventory database, which currently resides in an Microsoft Access database. Our inventory forms, as she mentioned, scanned, digitized, of course. And then, based on that, those two, as Maggie talked about, the inventory GIS data. So it's combining those three into what we think will be a user-friendly interface. And we're hoping you guys agree with this. This is based on current counts as of 9/12. There's about 94,000 surveyed properties, as I believe Jake mentioned and others have mentioned as well. And of those, about 14,000, according to the database, are National Register eligible. And then within the eligible, there are about a little over 9,000 that are listed. Now, it sounds like a discrepancy because we have on our website, there's approximately 1,800 properties that are called and are listed. And the reason there's a discrepancy is those do not, each building in say, a district that's listed is not necessarily accounted for, whereas here they are. So that's where you get a little bit of a discrepancy. But I wanted to make clear also with MnShip that it does not include archaeological sites. That's what the OSA portal will handle. MnShip will have an interactive map that allow you to browse, search for displayed historic properties, and how easy it is to see. It seems a little blurry, even for me, but this is a Mankato area, and as you can see, there are points, which are specific buildings or structures that are historic sites, and then see the red line going through, that's a railroad. And so we will have points, lines, polygons, trying to cover all the different types of historic properties that are out there. We have, of course, linear ones like railroads and roads. In some cases, there's even, I think, some stretches of river. And then the areas are more for districts or for large properties. But the primary ones are going to be points. And This is just an example of a pop-up. This is actually from our test environment right now for MnSHP, so this is stealing right from the ongoing effort. And you can see it has various attribute information, and that's something that Maggie talked about, that along with the points, you have database information or attribute information associated with each property. And I guess, kind of repeating myself here, but all of you recognize, I'm sure, these inventory forms. That is going to be included, and some of the information from those, like the inventory number, address, property type, but also township grade section, county. There will be associated significance information, things like that will be associated with the forms. And so basically everything that's available now at SHPO in the paper files will become available through MnSHP, except for items that I'll talk about. I believe this was alluded to earlier as well. I know Bruce talked about different credentials for folks for that archaeology information, and it's similar with our system. It's maybe not quite as sophisticated, but there are certain sites, historic sites, such as traditional cultural properties, which are, most of them are Native American, but not all, and many of those are restricted. There are also other National Register sites that are multidisciplinary. In other words, they're both historic and archaeological, and we want to protect that information. But for those that have the proper credentials, to be able to add historic properties, and that's one of the big things with this application that will be different. It won't be the same old system. And I'll discuss that a little bit more shortly. As you can see here in the map, there's a little point there that you add based on a draw menu, a draw tool, and then in the lower left is the form that you fill out, and it's similar to the forms we have right now, but we've tried to streamline it and take out some of the things that we didn't feel were as necessary, and keep it, but yet also include as much information that we felt would be useful. And we've also talked to consultants about this, so getting their feedback. Some of the beauty of this new product, and why I say why MnSHP, is you won't have to fill out PDF or paper inventory forms any longer for shipping. Now, I know we've requested that folks start to send in electronic copies only, and most people do. But I just wanted to make that point that even the PDFs, you won't have to download and fill them out and then send them in, because you'll have this application you can do. One of the other benefits for data reports, you won't have to send a data request and wait on me to get back to you. And I do try to be quick about it, but I realize sometimes people need things expedited. And it gives you a lot more flexibility with the tool to be able to do searches both through the database and the map that allow you to do that same type of thing. And so you won't need to ask data request SHPO at Minnesota State and then US, for data requests, and also for new inventory numbers. The application will create new inventory numbers automatically based on where you put your points, lines, or polygons. And also depending on if it's a railroad property as well, because railroads have, as some of you may be aware, have a little bit different nomenclature for their codes. Yeah, another thing is for database queries, like say you wanted to know the number of historic bridges in Bloomington, or you wanted to see a list of them, that's something you can do online, will be able to do online. So that's where a lot of the power of the system comes in, is no longer will you have to rely on yours truly or SHPO in general to be able to fulfill it. You will be able to do this and more by yourself. And again, this is a screenshot of the test environment. It may not look exactly like this when it's done, but we believe it'll be similar. There, as you can see, there's search fields to the right that you probably can't read them. It's a little fuzzy for me, maybe it's my eyes, but basically you can input like the historic inventory number if you happen to know what it is, or an address or historic name or something like that, and then it'll select those features and show them in the map, and then there is the possibility for looking at it in tabular format. And from the tabular format, you will be able to output to a CSV file, which is separated value is what it means. Basically, it's a text file that is commonly used at Excel. Then you can load it to Microsoft Excel and analyze and things like that. So it allows capability to work outside of the application, flexible tools like Excel, but this is in general kind of gives you a look and feel. One of the big things is you will no longer need to visit SHPO's office, and it's not that we don't want to see you, but you won't be depending on SHPO's office hours, and we are opening our office in the meantime, before mid-ship, of course, but it's only a couple days a week, and we realize that, it's difficult, especially for folks living in greater Minnesota to come in. As Jake was talking about, driving 4 hours to get to the cities, and being for a couple hours at SHPO looking up documents and things. You won't have to do that anymore, because it'll all be available online based on credentials, of course, for sensitive information for credentialing folks. But for the public, still a lot of data available, and you won't be dependent on our paper files, which are much improved since Mead and Hunt has reorganized and scanned them, but still digital is still better. Just to kind of talk about SHPO scanned archaeological site forms, and folks preceding me described this pretty well, so I won't belabor it, but basically those were scanned by 106 Group. They are complete, and those are going to become available, going to be combined with your site forms at OSA and become available. I don't know the timing exactly, but that's the plan. So that's where that particular information will become available. So it won't be a mid-ship, but it will be still available through OSA. It helps free up a lot of time. I know online work, yes, sometimes, I'm a person, I like to hold things tactile, paper, that type of thing, but the one advantage is you can work at any time. Again, you're not dependent on office hours, that type of thing. And, anywhere, if you want to be at the cabin and work on things. I suppose some folks may consider that not an advantage, but it at least allows a lot more flexibility that way. So that's one of the big things that we're looking forward to. Plus, I think there's going to be a lot of pattern data analysis and things that can be done that we can't even dream of at this point. That'll become available when things are digitized and are available through MnDOT. That now, only if you have a super person's memory can you remember it was in this document and this document. Now you'll be able to do, like Jake was talking about, the free text search that'll allow you to search across the database, across MnDOT, basically. What's the future hold? Well, only God knows, but this we hope. What as was mentioned, we'd like to include reports along with the historic inventory, starting with the architecture history reports and then hopefully getting archaeological, as well as the GIS data. That was one thing I forgot to mention, but of the survey areas and things like that that are involved in reports. And then one of the other things that SHPO that we're really looking, hopefully that we are looking at getting funding for, and that is for our programs. And these are just two of them, but they're probably the main two that would be involved. Is we'd like to have MnSHP perform project management for environmental review, like an E-106 type of submission process, and then tax credits as well. So we don't know exactly how that's all going to be set up and that type of thing, but that's kind of one of the hopes that we have for the future. And that's it. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you again for attending. We have a little bit of time for questions if anybody has those, and there's a break afterward too if you want to come up and talk to any of us.